Colin. Hey, this is Mark Goldberg with the UN Affairs blog, UN Dispatch. And who am I talking with, and where are you?
Sure, it's Matthew Lee of Inner City Press, this time not at the UN, but rather in Khartoum, the Sudan.
And I'd like to thank our good friends from Estonia, the Skype people, for making this call possible.
Sure.
On my end,
yeah,
at least.
Exactly.
Matthew, what in the world are you doing in Khartoum?
Sure. Well, I'm traveling with and covering the UN Security Council's whirlwind 10-day, 6-country tour through Africa to hotspots and peacekeeping missions. So this is I guess the second or third, depending how you count on it, stop of the 6. The first one was supposed to be Somalia, but UN security, and I guess others, deemed it too dangerous. So rather than go to Somalia itself, and it's a whole delegation. We're flying on a UN plane. The ambassadors are in the front. The press is in the back. We're looking out the window at extremely, thus far, arid lands. But we went to Djibouti. There was some UN facilitated talks between the transitional federal government and at least part of the opposition. That was one of the disputes. But we were there, then we've come to Sudan for 3 days. We went to Juba in South Sudan yesterday. Today was Khartoum, or really I went out to Omdurman. It's kind of like the Twin City. It's like the St. Paul to Minnesota being Khartoum, and the rebels were there. May 10th, they showed us. It was very funny. The Sudanese government has turned the attack site into kind of I'm calling it like a Mad Max museum of mayhem, of burned out technicals with rocket launchers on the back, captured uniforms.
And they've kept it all intact?
They've moved them around. They've moved it around because it's in the nature of a museum. They've lined the trucks up. It literally is like something out of Mad Max. And then they've lined up, there's a whole side of the square. It's an enormous square. It's like a town square. That it's actually the tomb of the Mahdi, of Ali Mahdi, who fought the Brits in 18 whatever.
Yes.
So it has a historical resonant place. But I mean, it really, some people were saying, it's just propaganda the way they're showing it, and it definitely has an aspect of that. At the same time, burned out pickups are burned out pickups. You know what I mean? They didn't invent 90 of them. Something clearly happened. The one sort of false note is they had these uniforms that they said that the rebels were wearing, and it had a Chad patch on the side, but the patch was brand new, entirely clean,
and
the uniform was
clearly sewn on.
Yeah, and at the same time, I actually think even people that are skeptical of this museum presentation are not skeptical that Chad or maybe another country that we could get into funded it. Something happened and somebody funded it. But why?
Well,
anyway. So there's,
for what it's worth, reports that I was hearing here in Washington D.C., and I could sort of safely say this, I think, is that
you can say it safely.
On the government of Sudan sort of launched a bunch of reprisal attacks against the Zaghawa tribe and members of them, and claimed because the president of Chad is also a Zaghawa.
Sure.
That the JEM was somehow, that Chad sponsored this attack, and so there were reprisals on sort of non-combatant civilians all over Sudan and in Omdurman as well.
Right. I think. I mean, again, I may be just too fair and balanced for you, Mark. But as you know, Chad also accused when Chad's capital was attacked. They claimed that the attackers came from Sudan, and Chad itself has gone over the border a few times. So there's definitely something. Something is afoot, and I just it is. That's why it's sort of to sew the patch on. Actually, there's some. I've gotten to a deeper level of sourcing that may be just total conspiracy based. But people that I've talked to that I think know what's going on, in fact, say that Chad may not. Chad has been a supporter of the GEM, and there's not a big question about that. But the timing of this attack, it may be something where the Chadian government said you're not going to prevail, because it wasn't to attack the capital of Khartoum. This is an extremely militarized country. I mean, there's not only soldiers everywhere, but they have helicopter gunships. It's almost amazing that they got as close as they did. So that there's some, I've heard a theory that another country, and it begins with an L and is a neighbor, may well have had some involvement in the timing of, Hopefully that won't show up on their, whatever the carnivore program of the Sudanese government is. The code word will work. Hopefully it's understandable.
Starts with an L and rhymes with idiot.
There we go.
So you saw the site of this attack. You saw these burned out trucks. Were there sort of government spokesmen there?
Oh, there was it's a whole industry out there. We didn't know what to expect, and I think actually this is as you might imagine. Although I'm in a sort of diplomatic reporting frenzy. There's always the UN angle.
Yeah.
Interestingly, the UN And I think it's because they have to work with the government here. I mean, let's be honest. Both of us can say, they sewed on the patches, this, that, and the other thing. But the UN has 2 peacekeeping missions in the country, and I've been watching the last 2 days as closely as I can how they interact with the government, and they are extremely conciliatory because the government bristles and contests everything. So that the UN itself, the UN itself came on this trip and actually functioned in a translating function for the Sudanese government. And in fact, at one point, like how many civilians were killed, the UN person says, "We can get you that number." And I started laughing because the numbers.
They wouldn't even translate it.
No, we can get you that number, and it was. And here's the ultimate. And I think this is obviously a footnote to the bigger picture stuff. But I think it's to me it's very interesting. They had said the Sudanese government wanted to invite these are the traveling press with the Security Council to speak to what they claim are captured child soldiers from the attack. And they give names and pictures, 18 pictures, ages ranging from 12 to 18. And they're staying in a place called, I have the UN page here. They're staying in a place called El Gali, which is an hour outside of Khartoum. And the UN's Department of Public Information said, here you will have the opportunity to meet and talk with a number of child soldiers arrested during the attack on the Sudanese capital. The child soldiers are allegedly of the JAM and are from both Darfur and Chad. Okay, tell me what you think. I'll stop before I say what this made me think about the Geneva Convention.
Yeah.
But do you think that's appropriate?
That what? That
the UN.
I'm sorry. I think I missed.
Okay. No. I mean, it's one thing. I mean, the government of Sudan is clearly it's over the top, and I think one of what they're trying to say with this is that they have 2 people that have been indicted by the International Criminal Court. Clearly, there's going to be. It sounds like there's going to be several more indicted soon. And they're saying if our opponents are in fact recruiting 12-year-olds to fight, why are only we being indicted? Therefore, to make their case, they want to offer to the traveling international press, come and meet the child soldiers. The thing is, I think it's a violation of international law to parade captured people in front of the press. Didn't this come up in a U.S. setting? And for the UN to be participating in proffering, come and interview the child soldiers. Was
how is the UN proffering that?
They can't. They canceled the trip. Once the issue was raised, they said. And then I think I actually asked today the Ambassador Soares of England and Kamal of South Africa are sort of leading this part of the trip. I asked Soares on the record what's happening with the child soldiers, and he said we don't have proof of that. It's only an allegation. Of course, we'd be very troubled, and the UN is looking into it. But here's the thing: these kids. This event took place May 10th, so more than 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. And
from day one, Sudan was on the record that there were child soldiers involved. They had the names and the kids, who they claim they're going to rehabilitate and return to their families. So the UN, I mean, I guess I don't understand what the law of child soldiers is, but 3 weeks after the fact to say, we don't have proof, we're checking it out, to me doesn't work. Because the UN has like 10,000 people in Sudan. Do you know what I mean? And they're putting out flyers offering go and meet. So I said you shouldn't take the press to talk to these captured children wherever they come from. But as the UN, you better get access. And I think what it is they don't want to. And I'll get off my soapbox. Even here I'm on it. Yeah. But I think literally politically, the UN does not want to take a position whether these are in fact combatant child soldiers and where they're from. Because whatever they decide has ramifications. It either makes Jem and Chad out to be war criminals, right? Or they have to remain here in the Sudan with a staff of 10,000 and say the government's lying, in which case some people will be ordered to leave the country. So they would prefer to say we're very concerned, but do nothing. But they got roped into sort of trying to be even-handed with the government of Sudan, offering this like interview tour with child soldiers, which to me is ludicrous. I mean, and I don't mean to be flip. The bottom line, if I were Superman, I would go to this town and set the kids free. Then they'd shoot me. Just but I mean, there's something I don't know. It's something that jumped out at me that I think it's not just sort of to make fun of the UN, but it captured. They're in a very. I'll say this. They're in a tough spot here, but I'm not sure that they're dealing with it always in an appropriate way. But they bristle whenever anyone questions how they're dealing with it. They're like, you don't understand. It's tough here. And it's like, no. I mean, I don't know how much I should do more to understand, but I'm totally willing to admit that it's tough here. But that doesn't mean that you blithely offer tours of child soldiers, Mm-hmm. Or they put themselves in very weird positions that I'm not sure. I think it'd be good if they had some internal. Maybe they do an internal sort of self-monitoring function of like, have we gone too far here? It's kind of, and I see it as related to this. It's a global issue of like the UN engaging with governments, and they always say we have to do it. I want to say that although the circles we both move in back in the U.S., everyone's talking about war crimes and ICC, and the government is terrible. The UN here, the on-the-ground people, are working very closely with the government. I want to say, and I know you'd say they have to. Okay, they have to, but they are, and it should be known that at the same time people think of the UN as sort of being kind of gallant and like, for example, let's get in more UN peacekeepers in Darfur. Well, if they engage friendlyly with the government there as they're doing here, I'm not sure what it will be accomplished. Okay, the soapbox is fully put away.
Well, presumably what would be accomplished is sort of more peacekeepers arriving. But I do take your point, and it's something that we talk about a lot is sort of the extent to which the UN has to cooperate with member states in order to get things like visas, so you can bring more aid workers in, or secure peacekeepers, like you said. Mm-hmm. But sort of returning to your trip.
Sure, no. Let's stay diplomatic. There'll be more than enough time.
No. Yeah. So, have you been? You mentioned you were in Juba. Is that right? We
were yesterday. Yeah, it's been. I'll be honest. I haven't been sleeping much. It's Juba, about 3 a.m. here, but
I can imagine it's 3 a.m. in the morning there. And you're getting up at 5.
We're going to Darfur. We're Darfur bound
later today.
Yep.
So let's start in Juba though. So Juba is basically the capital of South Sudan.
Yep.
Is that accurate?
It is, and it's incredibly lush. I mean, it's a whole. I definitely want to tell you about Djibouti and Somalia, but everything was, just topographically kind of dry and extremely hot. And then like this UN plane lands, and you go over all this very empty, increasingly green land, and then suddenly there's a town that's mostly one story, frankly, many like thatched huts, looking very much like houses you'd see in Uganda, not what you'd see in northern Sudan. On a flat plain with one or two kind of very striking mountains rising behind them, and there's an airport, and virtually every plane there is a UN plane. Virtually everyone. I mean, there's like a whole UN Air Force there, and when you get out, it's like a UN town. There's a whole camp, with walls and a Bangladeshi contingent guarding it, and a bunch of trailers with air conditioners that have UN radio stations and UN publications and everything UN. And
because maybe for the uneducated, there's a peacekeeping force there called UNMISS, the United Nations Mission in Sudan, that's about 10,000 strong, that was created in 2005 after a peace agreement between sort of Khartoum, the north, where you are right now, and the southern, mostly Christian rebels. And so this is sort of the peacekeeping presence there has been there since 2005 and is 10,000 strong. So
exactly. And I don't need to say. I just will say you maybe. I was really struck by the. But at the same time, it feels like the delegation went pretty much down to meet with Salva Kiir, who's the president of South Sudan and vice president of the country, pending what the peace agreement involves having a referendum at latest in 2011 of whether people want to break away from Sudan and become independent or remain part of the country. And so in this interim period, the president of South Sudan, Salva Kiir, is also the vice president of the country. But he was down there in a sort of a barely finished legislative assembly building. It was all very, it was kind of exciting. There's a mood there of sort of like, what would you call it, like a country building itself, There are these enormous posters of John Garang, who's the before Salva Kiir, the leader of the liberation movement there. And in fact, the delegation either had to. Some of the ambassadors were not queasy about it, but it felt sort of they went to pay tribute or homage to John Garang's tomb, which is essentially a kind of a cement gazebo with his body presumably there. Enormous photos of him, flowers, a table with a book, and each ambassador one by one sat down, surrounded by UN Bangladesh peacekeepers, writing their thoughts, And this seems to be, this is part of any visit. In fact, any visit to Juba involves this sort of, visit of homage to the tomb of John Garang, and he obviously is a huge figure.
Yeah, he was a big figure, and Americans liked him a lot as well. He sort of got his undergrad and PhD in Iowa at Grinnell, little tiny Grinnell College is where he.
But
went.
I think, and that's the other thing. The on-the-ground presence there, the UN is very visible. There's UN trucks everywhere. Again, I don't go looking for this stuff, Mark. Somebody that I know that's working there as a journalist said to me that the UN presence has distorted the economy of Juba beyond all recognition.
Yeah.
Homes
Well,
without
that's to be expected,
without running water and power only from a generator are going for 6 and 7 times what they were before the peacekeepers were deployed. I don't know how they would do that, but I think they need to think that through.
I've also read that it's becoming something of a boom town, an oil boom town. So you have investor. I've read this in an Economist article a while back. I think that there's sort of that investors are sort of flocking to southern Sudan.
There were a lot of strange cars there. I think, but it's not. The oil is not right there in Juba, but it's a lot of it is in this contested area that you hear in the news called Abyei, and there actually right now is some military action going on there in terms of who will control it.
Let's talk about that. Because I want to talk about Abyei next, but let's stay in Juba. So you went, you saw the ambassadors, sign the sort of memorial.
They met with Salva Kiir. The reason that the two are
Salva Kiir
are interrelated is that actually the topic, although they would have come down to meet with Salva Kiir, whatever the situation, because there was recently a lot of fighting in Abyei, and virtually all the civilians left. And now, actually, as we were arriving there, my colleagues from the wire services were like, "Great, we have live news," because as we were going there, it was reported that a Sudanese armed forces battalion was headed toward Abyei, and that's something that Salva Kiir confirmed. So the tensions are not just like from a few weeks ago; it's current, and the issue becomes like who's going to. This is an area that they both sides have agreed to kind of delineate it. It's kind of like it's almost like Ethiopia and Eritrea. Like they're going to somehow delegate to some outside third party who's going to tell them who owns the town and all the area and the oil under it. Obviously, whoever doesn't win that process is going to be unhappy and probably won't accept the result. I don't mean to be negative. I just sometimes to delegate out to a third party sounds good in the interim, right in the moment, but deep down you're going to be back with the same dispute. But
and that third party, incidentally, was the United States. According to folks from the Enough campaign, it was the Americans that wrote the sort of Abyei Protocol of the Comprehensive Peace Accord that sort of ended the war between the North and the South and really pressured Khartoum, that was reluctant to sign onto those for the Abyei Protocol. Because again, there's oil there.
I have the protocol with me. Yeah. You're right. I mean, as you can imagine, the U.S. involvement is not something that makes the government of Khartoum entirely confident in the process. And when you go down there, I just met actually up here in Khartoum the U.S. consul to Juba, and who's right now actually the quote chargé d'affaires. He's covering all of the country. Interestingly enough, the Sudan's ambassador to the UN didn't even know the guy. So there's clearly some communication problems going on. But they're down there, and there's definitely, there are USAID signs on the hospital. I always zero in on kind of weird things. But here's the guy that I know that's working as a journalist. I started asking him where, there's a number of papers down there. There's the Juba Post, the Southern Eye. There's some nationwide Sudanese media that's in English. But even the Juba Post is not printed in Juba, nor is the Southern Eye. One of them is printed in Uganda. The other one's printed in Khartoum. And the reason is, in South Sudan, which prospectively could be an independent country, right? There's not a single printing press, no printing press in South Sudan of any kind. So in fact, there's also all of the power is run by generators from diesel that's trucked in from Uganda or Kenya. There's some sort of basic things that are like, I guess between now and 2011 they're going to solve them. But it's a sort of it's not an artificially created state. I was talking to somebody about it tonight. In a way, yes, the government of the North never integrated it, so it was underdeveloped and there was always war. But it would seem like the people that are supporters of South Sudan, that's why I focused in on this printing press thing. It's sort of like, it's the kind of thing like, is the international community like helping this area or not, right? And actually, I learned tonight that the U.S. government intends to deliver a printing press very soon, or so I'm told.
Okay.
I mean,
progress.
So that's an aside, but I'm trying to capture because I wanted to. It was you could tell. I mean, all of the ambassadors are like, it's imperative. In fact, he left Khartoum just as we arrived, but the U.S.'s new special envoy for Sudan was here and left in a huff.
Yeah. Because
of the lack of flexibility. He said on both sides, not just on the Khartoum side, but on pretty much he meant Khartoum side, on the Abyei issue. So this is another, it's definitely a country where it's like you feel like there are these, there are problems, but even Ambassador Soares this evening said something like, we are applying gentle pressure to Sudan to try to get what we know they want, which is a peaceful country, and it was just sort of he had to put it in such a very friendly way that it made you. I mean, I think it's easy to sit in New York and be like, yeah, tell the Sudanese what to do, and then you see even these ambassadors of major powers, they're here and they're swallowing their words, because, for example, they want to meet tomorrow with President Bashir, and it's entirely possible Bashir will just blow them off. And if they were strong, they would say, who cares? But the reality is that will make their trip less than a diplomatic success. So they are very much mincing their words. And
so just so they can get that audience.
I think so. Yeah, exactly. They're all Ban Ki-moon's in miniature, I guess I'd say. But it's just sort of funny to me because you have these people that.
But this is like the ambassador of the United States. Is he on the
trip?
He's
not. Khalilzad is not. Khalilzad stayed in New York because the U.S. is the president of the council this month. So they have Ambassador Alejandro Wolf, who, interestingly enough, he's I believe. I mean, I know this. He's a civil servant, so he's not a political appointee. Yeah. He's a real diplomat. I mean, he knows all these guys, and he was swapping tales of. This is just sort of a funny aside, but the U.S. consul in Juba. In fact, the U.S. rented, I don't know at what cost, and I won't go there, a 3-bedroom house. So he has one room is his residence and office. His deputy has another room, which is also his office. But they do have a swimming pool, one of only 2 in Juba. But in order to get it funded by the State Department, they call it a water storage facility. And another diplomat that we just mentioned said that in the past he once had to get draperies paid for by the State Department, he had to call them a security screen. So these are sort of like diplomatic tales from the hood. But
So
go ahead.
Maybe getting back to sort of the sort of political situation, it seems so. Now I've sort of heard it said, and by groups like the International Crisis Group or the Enough Campaign, that most of sort of the diplomatic wrangling and of Khartoum's actions in and around Sudan are built upon the forthcoming elections, national elections that are scheduled in 2009, and that sort of Khartoum's actions in Abyei and in Darfur are all about trying to game the demographics in favor of the election and gain sort of demographic advantages for the upcoming election.
I think Abyei, most people see it as having very much to do with natural resources and being sure. But I mean, I don't dispute the.
Yeah. Are people talking about these elections and whether or not they'll happen?
I think I'll be honest. Since we've been here, at least the diplomatic on the political, these ambassadors have not. I was expecting that to be a major thing they'd be looking into. The problem is that there's always a crisis of the day. So they've been swept up into Abyei. I think has become a much bigger topic than they might have predicted, both because of the troop movements while they're here, and then also, and I'm sure you've seen this, the rumblings from the International Criminal Court on their way here. They did a press conference in New York, and Soares was the one speaking, Ambassador Soares of the UK. And he said, well, he wouldn't say whether they were going to raise the International Criminal Court or not, which was kind of surprising, given the UK's position that that these two individuals who've been indicted need to be turned over. They did raise it today. Today, after having dodged or declined to answer the question 3 times, it was said today after they had a meeting not with Bashir but with Dr. Nafi, the presidential advisor, also the foreign minister and another minister. Pretty tense meeting. We saw the beginning of it, and then we had to get out. We were thrown out of the room. But the way Soares summarized it, he said the majority of council members expressed concern of the lack of cooperation with the ICC indictments. But then when we looked into it a little more, there's definitely a split. China, for example, said it's very complicated, and there are many issues that have to be dealt with regarding Darfur, humanitarian, impunity, but they all have to be dealt with in a comprehensive and coherent fashion, which I interpreted to mean they're all related. One could be traded for another. See what I mean? Yeah. I mean, I think that's what it means.
Well, I guess maybe, so correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying that the British ambassador was reluctant to raise the ICC issue.
He was reluctant to say publicly that he would raise it. I think because, again, diplomatically he wanted to get in, and they were not going to pull not allow the ambassadors to come in. But I really do think a lot of it is if they come to a country and the leader won't meet with them because they've talked to the press about the International Criminal Court, then it's a big blow to them. It's kind of like these guys are diplomats. They pride themselves. It's kind of they play a double game. They'll say one thing in New York, but now that they're here, They did raise it, though, because I think they knew they had to raise it. In fact, he looked sort of...
Again...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I just say it seems like this almost parallels the... sort of the situation that the UN finds itself in that you described, that you don't want to be too untoward toward your host because you can't sort of extract sort of things that you need from your host if you're always criticizing them, and it seems that sort of both groups, the UN and sort of now the member states are acting sort of similarly.
Sure, I think also to Soros' credit, he's not dealing with a unified council. It's not. When I went back over the tape, because at first I thought he said, "Okay, you'll be happy to know we did raise it." Because every time I see him, I've asked him like 3 times. I've written 3 articles saying he's dodging the question. So he's like, "You'll be happy to know that it was raised." But then you listen more closely. He said a majority of the members raised it, and then you could start figuring out who didn't raise it. And in fact, actually, the Russian. I mean, and I believe this was on the record on the plane. That the Russian representative on the trip even took a position of like, hey, we respect the territorial integrity of Sudan. Don't talk about South Sudan becoming independent. And I was like, you have to talk about it. The CPA allows a referendum on just that. But I think that there's some bedrock positions of some members of the council which are really, very old school. Like they believe in sovereignty. They believe in territorial integrity. They believe in not meddling in internal affairs. So it's, it's pretty. And people, I say this because even while I've been here, I've been reading up on not just the Enough campaign, but the Aegis Trust put out a 17-minute film, showing pixelated faces of people in Darfur saying Ali Kushi killed my grandfather, and Ahmed Haroun is directed the whole action from his stat phone in the car. I mean, pretty extraordinary testimony.
To step back, these are the 2 individuals that have been indicted by the ICC.
Mm-hmm. One of whom is actually, Ahmed Haroun is the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs. And this evening I spoke with a representative of a large NGO who asked to remain nameless, who said, yes, we have to deal with the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, and no, I cannot say any more about our dealings with Mr. Haroun, because he's the head of it. Yeah. So to do humanitarian business here, that's who you're dealing with. Meanwhile, you have...
Right, his reward for being indicted was being promoted.
Right, and I don't know if it's even a reward to him. It was a real thumbing the nose at the international community.
Sure.
And also...
Sure.
And the thing is, I will step back, though. It's not like... I think, and I know that some of our viewers, listeners, are going to think that it's an absurd comparison. But from the Sudanese perspective, that we'll go back to this Omdurman, Mad Max Museum show. I mean, if whoever sponsored that, these people, there's no question that they killed civilians. I mean, they have, they rode into a densely populated historic city with Mad Max vehicles and rockets, and they fired them. And some went into apartment buildings, and it did happen. So their position is, where's the ICC investigation of Chad? And I want this is going to be a way. I wanted to raise Somalia. I'll say this: we went to these talks in a very fancy place in Djibouti. Believe it or not, extremely hot. U.S. and French military everywhere, and then this ridiculously exclusive armed camp of a hotel where the Somali parties, all on the UN's dime, are meeting. Okay. Yeah. Somali civil society came, and half of these guys live in England, by the way. Most of the UN's interlocutors on the opposition side live in Britain. So was quite striking, because obviously if you
this sounds like a good story, and keep going. I just want to let you know I have maybe 5 minutes left before my count.
Okay. No, definitely. But the reason
tell the story. Tell the story.
Sure. The reason this is related is that even these largely British-based Somali civil society interlocutors, they spoke with the council, and then as the press, we asked them questions and ate some croissant with them, looking at they said in their written presentation that they asked the council to look into human rights violations in Somalia, including, when I asked the question, a referral to the International Criminal Court, right? Because they say, and they're not just talking about the insurgents, they're talking about the TFG, the Ethiopian troops, and the council's answer, or Soros on behalf of the council, said, no, we're not here to impose anything. That would be up to the parties. And the reason I'm saying all this is to say Sudan's perspective is, wait a minute. In the case of Sudan, the council referred it to the International Criminal Court. Sudan's not a state party. They said, it's so bad, you, Luis Moreno Campo, do an investigation and decide who's guilty. But regarding Somalia, which I want to tell you is currently, it's bad to compare. there have been more people displaced in Somalia in the last year, I believe, than in Sudan. God forgive me if my numbers are wrong, but you could probably get a UN report saying that Mogadishu has become, it was a ghost town, and these guys
well, the point is, there's a lot.
It's terrible.
There's a lot.
It's at least in the same ballpark in terms of the targeting of civilians, and the fact that the council would say, "Oh no, it's totally up to the parties to decide whether the ICC should get involved." It's a double standard. Now, why it's a double standard, nobody knows. A cynic would say because some of the guilty parties in Somalia are Ethiopia, and behind them the U.S. and the EU that supported the transitional federal government, and therefore there's no interest in an inquiry into who's killing civilians there. So this doesn't say that Sudan is not terrible and guilty, but when they do use a word like double standards, they have something of a point, or at least there's an argument there that often doesn't get out at all, because people are just like, Sudan's terrible, Somalia, who cares? And Somalia's terrible. And this was not a request by the press this was by the very civil society parties that the UN said were credible, and that's what they asked for. So where's the beef? The search continues.
Yeah, no, sir. And I guess, and we might just get cut off in mid.
That's fine. I think that would be entirely blogging heads appropriate.
Well, there you go. Just on this ICC point, it seems that we had this long conversation last UN Plaza with an ICC expert from the Human Rights Watch, and one of the points we talked about was how it can sort of serve the cause of justice when it's a point of political leverage that helps parties come closer to an agreement by dangling a sword above their head if need be, and that sword through the Security Council could be removed.
But when exactly, but then it takes the problem that the Security Council has painted itself into a corner because they're all on the record. Right. Most of them. I don't think China's on the record. Maybe probably Russia not either. But the UK, France, and the UN and the US are all on the record as against impunity. And so, indicting somebody for horrific acts and then saying, "Okay, sorry, never mind," is a definition of impunity. And I think that's where the next, just as a curtain raiser, from here we go to Chad, which is obviously, Soros said to me, well,
via Darfur, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, we're going to Darfur, then we're coming back, then we're going to Chad, and then also the Democratic Republic of the Congo. One of the issues there is, it was reported today that the government is now going to militarily target the Lord's Resistance Army, which is a rebel group in northern Uganda, also indicted by the ICC, but with whom the UN has been meeting, very much trying to make peace in northern Uganda, and pretty much implying that if they sign a peace agreement, these indictments could disappear or be replaced by a somewhat dubious Ugandan process involving eating bitter roots.
But with the LRA, the point is they didn't sign the peace and are remilitarizing, which is. Again, I had someone on the program, Julia Spiegel, who made the point that Kony seems to have made the decision that he needs to form an army again and is kidnapping people and children and conscripting them into their army. So it seems that he is a military threat, and I
think he thinks he needs more leverage. Basically, the Ugandan government started saying, "You don't control anybody anymore. Why are we talking with you?" And so he's trying to build up numbers. The thing is, and again back to the UN, I want to say this: you can look this up. The UN has been asked repeatedly to confirm or deny, to use their on-the-ground presence in DRC particularly, but also Central African Republic and South Sudan, to confirm or deny these accounts of the LRA grabbing hundreds of children, mass rape, this stuff, recent, not old charges, current. And the UN has gone out of its way to say, we have no way to confirm it. And they have people, if anyone can confirm it, it's them. And again, it's one of these things that I think they're still holding out hope that there'll be peace, so that I don't want to say they're looking the other way, but some charges are bad enough that however they cut politically, to remain credible, you have to look into them. And I would put these 18 child soldiers, confirm or deny. You've got to go check it out, even if it's inconvenient. You're on the record saying this is an issue that's of global importance. So you have to pursue it wherever it leads you. I don't know.
So no, I agree. So is your where in Darfur are you going to be tomorrow?
El Fasher, and it's unclear. But there's still some back and forth.
Are you going to be able to visit a camp?
Yes, that's the Zamzam camp. That's the plan. And it's interesting again because the UN has got their plane and is taking us out there. This being Sudan, the Sudanese government has said, hey, if you're taking the Western press, you've got to take the Sudanese press. So some of my colleagues are like saying, "Oh, we're not going to have any space on the not space on the plane." It's very funny because the Sudanese press is But unlike any, it's very. I mean, everything is the idea is like balance. You know what I mean? They're going to say, okay, we're not just because it's true. Also, I mean, on the other, even though what happened today with them translating for the Sudanese government and offering civilian dead, and interviews with child soldiers was totally over the top. At the same time, they can't. I think some of them might like to, but they can't come in and give a totally. This is not the Upper West Side. This is Khartoum. This is their country, and they're watching very closely. In fact, I watched tonight as the Sudan's ambassador to the UN dressed down in a very open way the special representative of the Secretary General here in Khartoum for one of his underlings. The legal advisor had tried to do something about this trip to Omdurman, and the guy. I mean, to me, what was most significant is that the UN has to kind of grin and bear it. When the government says you're out of line, hit the road, Jack.
Yeah.
They've got to say okay, and then they fine tune.
What I hope for you that sort of powerful member states like the United States sort of stand up and back up the UN and sort of imposes upon Khartoum a set of conditions whereby their behavior is met with sort of punitive action. Now, I'm not saying military action. I'm just saying ramp it up a little bit, and not just in rhetoric.
Absolutely.
And the UN has no power there. The UN can't. Oh, there we go.
Okay, that'll be that. That's the end.